Another video. Purple Political Talk here. Today is Wednesday, August 25th, 2021, and today we're going to be discussing the 2024 presidential election and take an updated look at my 2024 presidential election prediction between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. So, at this point, this is one of the more likely scenarios, as both of these candidates, I would say, are frontrunners at this time for their parties. And it's going to be a very interesting scenario. But before we do begin, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, and to turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And also that channel memberships are now open. If you would like to support the channel, you can become a Purple Political Talk channel member by pressing the link down in the description or pressing the joint button next to the subscribe tab. And in that spirit, I did want to give a very big thanks to our Purple Political Talk channel members, Adam Hurst and David Maxwell. We really could not do this without you. Now that we've gotten all of this out of the way, let's get started with the video. So, this race is actually very interesting. I think that in general terms, both of these candidates are insanely unpopular, but I think that they have their better areas for each candidate. Like, they have their regions that they could do better. And overall, I think that the way the Biden administration has been handled with a lot of different issues has really tarnished Kamala Harris. And I think ultimately she was a pretty bad candidate from the beginning when she ran for president unsuccessfully in 2020. And I think it's something that's going to be really interesting to see play out against another quote-unquote unpopular candidate, in this case Donald Trump. And I think that this race is going to show us that it's going to be kind of who is liked more over the two, because we can both agree or we can all agree that this race is sort of like the 2016 election, that you have two unpopular candidates. And I would say that Kamala Harris in many ways is the reincarnation of Hillary Clinton into a new political figure. I think that they share a lot of traits, likability, things like that. And I think it's going to be something that's going to be pretty obvious, in this prediction. So on your screen right now, you're going to see your starting off map. These are the states that would be safe or over 15% for either party. Starting off, we have Donald Trump at 125 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 183. So now let's take a look at the meat and potatoes of this prediction, the Tossup States, and start by talking about the likely states. Likely states are states that would go to either candidate by a margin of less than 15%, but more than 5%. So let's get started by talking about Kamala Harris's likely states. So Kamala Harris is someone who I think is going to do very well in her areas that the Democrats have performed well over time. The Democrats have established their support. They have a lot of establishment support. Virginia, Colorado, a lot of those places. I would go as far as saying places like Minnesota could end up voting by a likely margin for Kamala Harris. I think, for example, in Minnesota, it's a different case. That, the areas that the suburbs of Minneapolis and St. Paul, which were somewhat crucial for the Republicans to make inroads here, have turned more liberal. And I think a lot of the social movements that have been happening have really impacted the state of Minnesota. While there are parts that are trending red, I think Kamala Harris is going to end up doing very well there. As for Donald Trump, I think he has a certain states. Over Kamala Harris, I think he does very well in Iowa, very well in Ohio. Texas and Florida are two states that I could see him easily beating Kamala Harris. I think that in Iowa and Ohio, we're mostly looking at Kamala Harris is going to do horrible, I think, with rural voters. And in these states, the real reason why the Democrats haven't been able to win here, it's because they've lost the rural support. In Iowa and Ohio, having rural support is very important because it really does add up. And I think that, moving forward, it's going to be a pretty important part when it comes to winning elections in those places. And I really do think that Donald Trump has better appeal for those voters. As for the Sun Belt, you could say that, well, the Democrats have been building up their support in the Sun Belt, and Kamala Harris is kind of the next step. And I think, yes, I agree the Democrats have built a lot of support down in the Sun Belt. Now, I wouldn't go as far as saying, though, Kamala Harris is 100%, the person to take and move forward with the Democratic Party in the South. I think that Texas and Florida are two states that are very pro against socialism, and I don't think they really like candidates like Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is unpopular. I think that there's no way to go around it, and I think Trump is also unpopular. Both candidates have, their downfalls in popularity. Now, one of the things I do think will help Donald Trump in this scenario is that truly, especially in the South, that Donald Trump has the policies, his policies are popular. And I think in places like Texas and Florida, that's going to really help him out. The Democratic Party is going way too far with a socialism message. And that's going to hurt them in places like Florida and Texas, especially when you have someone like Donald Trump, who is a campaign machine. Who, I mean, even with a lot of things we saw in 2020, he almost won that election. So I think if that's a lot to tell, I think that's, going to show us what could happen if Trump runs in 2024. So this covers our likely states. Let's now move on to our lean states. Lean states are states that would go by less than 5%, but more than 1.5%. So essentially, these states are still going to be close, but they're not going to be, very, very like thin hair tight. So let's talk about Kamala Harris's lean states. So there's certainly going to be places where Kamala Harris is going to do well. Nebraska's 2nd district. This is a pretty liberal district in the United States. I forgot to also say that Maine's 2nd district, I think, would go if it stays in a current form. Remember, the state is being redistricted. I do think it's going to end up going for Donald Trump, but that's going into the likely margins again. But in the lean margins, for Kamala Harris, I do think she's going to do very well in somewhere like, Nebraska. New Mexico is a state that the Republican Party has the ability to get closer if Hispanic support continues to go their way. And I think that Kamala Harris is going to be someone who has a lot of support with, African American votes, more urban areas. And I think that one of the regions that, she's going to struggle with is the Hispanic population and with working class voters, but I'll get to that later. But I think if she struggles with Hispanic voters, I do still think that she's going to win New Mexico. New Mexico is a state where the Democrats have built a coalition. They built the support enough to, carry them through a lot more elections. But I do think that it's going to be something that is going to be closer than we've seen in the past. Now, other places I think she could win. I think over Trump, she definitely wins in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a state that, a lot of college-educated voters. I think that it's a state that a lot of people who, are in favor of the Democratic Party against the Trump wing of the Republican Party. There's a lot of those voters. And the anti-Trump enthusiasm in New Hampshire probably is going to be high. In 2020, we saw Joe Biden blow out, Donald Trump. Again, Kamala Harris by no means is Joe Biden when it comes to electability and all of these different issues. But I think she's going to have a lot more electability, at least in New Hampshire, over someone like Donald Trump. Now, that covers our lean states for Kamala Harris. Let's talk about Donald Trump. Against Kamala Harris, I see Donald Trump winning in certain parts of the country by a little bit more. I think he could win Wisconsin and Pennsylvania by around 2 percentage points. Kamala Harris is simply not the candidate for these two regions. I think that these areas really like their populists, and Kamala Harris is by no means a populist. She is an establishment Democrat who, is progressive for certain issues. But, ever since she's become vice president, a lot of the progressive wing that really got her support and got her to be that superstar in the Democratic Party, has slowly shifted away. So I do think that by around a margin of 1.5%, 2%, we could see Donald Trump do very well in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania against Kamala Harris. And I think it just really comes down to the fact that Trump is a better candidate for the Midwest than Kamala Harris. I don't think there's a fact that we can lie about that. But I do think that everywhere else on the map, that would be Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and Michigan, would be extremely close in this scenario. I think that Kamala Harris could do very or moderately well in the Sun Belt. I think that she's a candidate who has a lot of flaws, and I think a lot of people are not going to vote for her. And I'm going to get into what states I think will go to her or not. But, I think generally speaking, Trump has, better appeals with working class voters. So that brings me to our tilt states. Tilt states are states that would go by less than 1.5%. Very close states, states that ultimately are going to be deciding factors in the race. So when we take a look at this map, I usually, when I talk about tilt states, I like going from west to east. So we're going to do that today. So in Nevada, I do think that there's a possibility for Trump narrowly holding on, or actually narrowly, flipping the state. However, I do think Kamala Harris is narrowly going to carry the state of Nevada against Donald Trump. I think it just comes down to the fact that there is a considerable amount of, appeal that she has from the western states. I think she could do very well in the region. Donald Trump is going to get close, but I don't think it's going to be enough. As for the state of Arizona, I think Donald Trump narrowly defeats, Kamala Harris. I think it's pretty easy to tell that Donald Trump is not popular in Arizona, in Georgia. just because of how moderate a lot of these, people are in those states. And I think ultimately, in places like Arizona, you're going to see a lot of those voters that voted for Biden because he's a lot more moderate than Trump, at least when it comes to his rhetoric and things like that. Those people are going to, shy away from Harris and vote for Donald Trump. Moving on to the state of Georgia, I do think that Georgia is the state that Kamala Harris could do very well in. I think this is one of the states that she has the best chance of winning. And I think if it wasn't for Kamala Harris, Biden would have lost the state of Georgia. So I do think that, she's still going to narrowly hold on here. The Democrats have built such a big coalition of voters. And, a lot of the country club Republicans here, I don't think they're going to go back and vote for Harris. And African-American turnout in Georgia is actually through the roof. And I think that's really going to help her out in this race. And I think she narrowly wins there. Last two states, Michigan, North Carolina. In Michigan, I would go as far as saying it's probably going to be a tilt Republican state. And I'll go as far as saying that North Carolina could also go tilt Republican. I think that these two states share, the same populist thing. North Carolina, I think, actually has a better chance of going than Michigan to Harris based on African-American support and things like that. But I think generally speaking, Donald Trump is going to have, an easier time, at defeating Kamala Harris based on her views, based on her things, and where the country is today. I think that we cannot argue that, the Biden administration has, had their unpopularities. And Kamala Harris truly has been unpopular with a big amount of voters since the beginning. And I think it's really gotten worse. With the border crisis, with the Afghanistan situation, it does not look good. And I think Trump being out of office, it's going to be really easy for him to say, I wouldn't have done that. And, campaign in this way that, armchair, like an armchair quarterback in a way that, I would have done this differently. And, it's always easier to win when you're in the offensive than defending. Defending is always harder, and I think Kamala Harris is going to be, showing us that if this ends up being the 2024 scenario. So my final prediction for this prediction is 290 electoral votes for Donald Trump to 248 for Kamala Harris. So guys, I want to know if you guys agree with this prediction. If so, please comment down below. And if you disagree, I also want to know what you guys think. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and goodbye.